The year is 2025. The South China Sea, a waterway that's been simmering with tension for decades, has finally boiled over. It's happened. After a brutal, unprecedented confrontation, the Philippines has officially declared China's escalating aggression an act of war. And now, the world holds its breath. What happens next? What follows a declaration of that magnitude? But before we get into it, I need to be crystal clear. The scenario we're about to walk through is a detailed, hypothetical analysis. As of today, August 29th, 2025, there has been no formal declaration of war. This is a simulation, a look into one possible future, but one that is grounded in the very real and rising tensions defining the region right now. We're going to explore the immediate military options, the catastrophic economic fallout, and how this regional clash could spark a global firestorm. This isn't just a story about two nations, it's about a single flashpoint that could completely reshape our century. Section 1. The trigger, the point of no return. Every war has a beginning, a single moment that becomes the point of no return. In our hypothetical timeline, that moment is August 11th, 2025. The place, the turbulent waters near Scarborough Shoal, a reef well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, but under Beijing's de facto control for more than a decade. For months, the pattern has been dangerously predictable. Philippine Coast Guard vessels trying to resupply their outposts or support their fishermen run a terrifying gauntlet. They face off against the Chinese Coast Guard and its maritime militia in a sinister ballet of blockades, water cannons, and near collisions. Analysts call these gray zone tactics, aggressive moves designed to coerce and intimidate, all while staying just under the threshold of what most would consider conventional war. China has mastered this playbook, using its sheer numbers to harass and assert control without technically firing a shot. But on August 11th, the script is violently rewritten. A Philippine supply ship on a routine mission to support local fishermen is once again cornered by Chinese vessels. But this time, the intimidation tactics spin out of control. A People's Liberation Army Navy destroyer and a massive Chinese Coast Guard cutter both move to intercept the much smaller Philippine ship. In the chaos of this aggressive maneuver, clearly intended as a show of overwhelming force, the unthinkable happens. The Chinese destroyer collides with its own Coast Guard vessel. The impact is devastating. Video, captured by the Filipino crew, shows the bow of the huge Coast Guard ship completely crushed, the steel torn apart by the collision with its own naval escort. While Beijing goes silent, refusing to confirm any details, reports leak out about significant damage and, most critically, casualties among the Chinese crews. It's a moment of pure humiliation for a nation that has so carefully crafted an image of flawless maritime power. For the Philippines, however, it's something much more frightening. This incident, a direct result of reckless aggression aimed at their ship, is the final straw. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had already drawn a red line. The death of any Filipino citizen due to China's willful actions would be treated as something dangerously close to an act of war. While no Filipinos were killed this time, the sheer recklessness and lethal potential of the confrontation are seen in Manila as an undeniable escalation. It's a sign that China's gray zone campaign has crossed over into outright military hostility. A nation's patience has finally run out. Section 2. The Declaration, a line in the sand. The news of the collision sparks a firestorm in Manila. The images of two Chinese naval giants crashing into each other while harassing a lone Filipino boat become a powerful rallying cry. This wasn't some simple accident, it was the inevitable result of a relentless campaign of intimidation. After emergency meetings with his top defense and foreign policy advisors, the Philippine president makes a declaration that echoes across the planet. China's actions, which have now shown a clear and present danger to Filipino lives and national sovereignty, are being treated as an act of war. Now, this isn't a declaration of war like you'd see in old movies. It's a very specific political and legal statement designed to do two key things. First, it internationalizes the conflict on a whole new level, elevating it far beyond a simple territorial squabble. Second, and this is the crucial part, it serves as the official trigger for the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States. For years, what it would take to activate this treaty has been a huge question. What counts as an armed attack? Would America really risk a war with China over a reef or a fishing boat? Washington has repeatedly said its commitment is ironclad, and that an armed attack on any Philippine public vessel, aircraft, or its armed forces, including its Coast Guard, would invoke the treaty. Manila's declaration is a calculated high-stakes gamble. It forces Washington's hand. By framing the August 11th incident and the pattern of aggression as an act of war, the Philippines is officially stating that the line for an armed attack has been crossed. The diplomatic ambiguity is gone. The question is no longer if the United States will respond, but how. The world's attention swings from the South China Sea to the White House. America's next move will decide if this crisis is contained or if it spirals into a devastating great power conflict. Section 3, the first 48 hours, military escalation scenarios. With the declaration made, the clock is ticking. The first 48 hours are absolutely critical as militaries shift from a state of deterrence to active engagement. The world waits, watching for China's reaction and America's counter-move. Let's break down the most likely ways this could play out. Scenario Alpha: China's punitive blockade. Beijing, humiliated by the collision and furious at Manila's declaration, likely wouldn't launch an immediate full-scale invasion. Its first goal would be to punish the Philippines quickly and decisively to show the world the folly of defying its power. The most probable move is a punitive blockade. The Chinese Navy and Coast Guard would enforce a total maritime and air exclusion zone around key strategic locations. The first target would almost certainly be the BRP Sierra Madre at 2nd Thomas Shoal. That rusting warship, long a symbol of Filipino defiance, would be completely cut off. Any attempt to resupply it, by air or sea, would be met with overwhelming force. At the same time, China would probably blockade Scarborough Shoal, locking out any Filipino vessels. They might also impose a distant blockade on major Philippine ports like Manila or Subic Bay, using their massive fleet to stop commercial shipping and squeeze the nation's economic lifeline. China would try to frame this as a limited law enforcement action inside its own indisputable territory, a narrative spun to create diplomatic confusion and slow down a unified international response. Scenario Bravo: the American response and treaty activation. The second Manila's declaration is confirmed, it's all hands on deck at the Pentagon and the White House. The Mutual Defense Treaty, a pillar of American strategy in the Pacific for over 70 years, has been invoked. To ignore it would be to shatter U.S. credibility not just with the Philippines, but with allies all over the world, from Japan and South Korea to Australia and even NATO. The initial U.S. response would be fast and symbolic. A U.S. carrier strike group, likely already in the region, would get orders to steam towards the Philippines. Freedom of navigation operations, or FONOPs, would become more frequent and more daring, directly challenging China's blockade zones. U.S. military assets already in the Philippines under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement would be put on high alert. The biggest decision would be whether to directly escort Philippine ships. If the U.S. Navy starts escorting supply ships to 2nd Thomas Shoal or commercial vessels toward Manila, that's the point of maximum danger. It puts U.S. and Chinese warships in the same patch of water with opposite missions. A Chinese commander under orders to enforce the blockade would be staring down a U.S. warship commander under orders to break it. A single miscalculation, a radar lock, a warning shot, could instantly escalate this into a direct military exchange between two nuclear powers. Allies like Australia and Japan would be called on for support, widening the coalition against Beijing. Scenario Charlie: hybrid warfare and asymmetric threats. While the navies make headlines, a shadow war would erupt. China would unleash its full arsenal of hybrid warfare tactics. Massive cyber attacks would target Philippine critical infrastructure, power grids, banking systems, and government networks to sow chaos and panic. A sophisticated disinformation campaign would flood social media, trying to divide Philippine society, undermine its government, and paint Manila as a reckless American puppet. The Philippines, in turn, would lean on its own asymmetric advantages. Its military modernization program, dubbed Horizon 3, has been focused on acquiring tools for exactly this scenario. Recently acquired assets like the BrahMos anti-ship missile batteries, deployed along its western coast, would pose a serious threat to any Chinese ship in their range. The Philippine military, while outgunned conventionally, would prepare to fight a defensive war, using its thousands of islands to its advantage. The goal isn't to defeat the Chinese Navy outright, but to make any attempted occupation so bloody and costly that Beijing is forced to rethink its plans. A full-scale invasion of the Philippines, an archipelago of over 7,000 islands and 115 million people, is still highly unlikely because of the staggering logistical nightmare it would present. But the first clashes at sea and in the air would set the stage for a long, grinding conflict, with the whole world watching to see if the first shots of a new global war have just been fired. Section 4. The Economic Domino Effect, Global Collapse. While all eyes are glued to the military chess match, the global economy would start to bleed out. The South China Sea isn't just water, it's the world's most critical commercial highway. Over a third of global shipping, worth an estimated $5.3 trillion in trade every year, sails through these waters. It's a superhighway for everything from the oil that runs our cars to the microchips that run our world. A war here wouldn't just disrupt trade, it would cause a systemic collapse of global supply chains. The moment a conflict erupts, insurance premiums for any ship even thinking of entering the region would skyrocket, effectively freezing maritime traffic. Rerouting ships would add weeks and millions of dollars to every single voyage. That cost gets passed straight to you and me, causing a surge in global inflation for almost every product you can imagine. The shipping disruptions seen in the Red Sea in 2024 would look like a minor traffic jam compared to a full shutdown of the South China Sea. For the Philippines, the economic pain would be instant and catastrophic. With its ports blockaded and fishing fleets stuck at the docks, the economy would grind to a halt. Foreign investment would vanish overnight. One study estimated a regional conflict could wipe out up to a third of the Philippines' GDP. This isn't just a recession, it's a full-blown national depression unfolding in weeks, potentially leading to a humanitarian crisis as food and essentials run out. Nearby countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Taiwan would face similar, devastating shocks. But the pain wouldn't stay in Asia. China, the factory of the world, would be cut off from many of its biggest markets and, crucially, from the energy imports it needs to survive. Japan and South Korea, two of the world's biggest economies, are almost totally dependent on the South China Sea for their energy and raw materials. A sustained blockade would cripple their industries. Even the United States wouldn't be safe. A huge percentage of its trade in goods passes through the region. The supply chain chaos and spike in energy prices would risk throwing the US economy into a severe recession. A war in the South China Sea reveals a brutal truth about our modern world. Our entire economic system is built on the assumption of peace. When that assumption shatters, the complex web of global trade that holds up our way of life unravels with terrifying speed. Section 5. The Diplomatic Chessboard, Alliances on the Brink. As military and economic shockwaves ripple out, a frantic diplomatic battle would begin. This conflict would force every nation to pick a side, redrawing the geopolitical map in real time. The first organization to be tested would be ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Historically, ASEAN has struggled to act decisively because it requires all members to agree, and many are deeply tied to China's economy. The organization would likely fracture, becoming totally ineffective. Some members would quietly back the Philippines, while others, fearing China's wrath, would call for calm on all sides. Diplomatic code for a neutrality that helps the aggressor. In Europe, there would be strong condemnation of China's actions, but a deep reluctance to get involved with military force. European nations would likely impose sanctions on Beijing and offer diplomatic support. But with their resources stretched thin by other global crises, their role would probably be limited to economic and political pressure. The real diplomatic brawl would take place at the United Nations Security Council. The US and its allies would put forward a resolution condemning China's aggression and demanding its forces withdraw. China, as a permanent member, would veto it instantly, making the UN's most powerful body completely powerless. This predictable stalemate would expose the deep flaws in the post-World War II international order and its inability to handle great power conflict. The crisis would, however, energize a new kind of coalition. The Quad, made up of the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, would likely shift from a diplomatic form to a de facto wartime alliance. Australia and Japan, both US treaty allies who are deeply invested in freedom of navigation, would provide critical support. Japan, which has its own territorial disputes with China, would see this as a direct threat to its own survival. This conflict would force a harsh choice on all the nations that have tried to walk the line between Washington and Beijing. They'd have to decide, is their future in a US-led order based on international law, or a new order dominated by Beijing's coercive power? The lines drawn in the first few weeks of this crisis could define international relations for the next 50 years. This is a scenario with no good outcomes and absolutely devastating consequences. It shows just how close the Indo-Pacific is to a catastrophic war. So, what do you think? Could a full-blown conflict be avoided, or is it inevitable once these dominoes start to fall? Share your analysis in the comments below. And if you want to keep understanding the complex forces shaping our world and the potential conflicts of tomorrow, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. From a single violent clash over a contested shoal, the path to global conflict is terrifyingly short. A hypothetical declaration of war by the Philippines wouldn't just be a regional fight. It would trigger an immediate chain reaction of military obligations, economic collapse, and diplomatic showdowns. The United States would be locked into its treaty commitments, putting its military on a collision course with China's. The global economy, built on the fragile peace of the South China Sea, would shatter, breaking supply chains and crashing markets from Asia to North America. Alliances would be tested like never before. Some would break under the strain, while new, more urgent coalitions would form to face down the aggression. This scenario, while just a simulation for now, is a stark warning. It shows that the gray zone isn't a stable form of competition. It's a slippery slope toward open war, where one miscalculation or unforced error could unleash consequences that no nation, not even the aggressor, can possibly control. The real challenge for the world is to find a way back from the brink before the first shot is ever fired.